Hello and welcome to the Olive Tree and more stories about what God is doing in the Middle East, Israel in particular, amongst believers in Jesus who live there. I'm Julia Fisher and my guest today is Eric Benson, director of the House of Victory, a rehab centre for men recovering from drug and alcohol abuse. Eric is in Haifa. I'm here in the UK. And it's so good that we can use available technology to make these programs and keep the stories rolling. We've made it, Eric. We've connected.
Amen.
It's
Amen.
good to welcome you to the program.
Yeah.
Good to
Praise
talk to
God
you.
for this technology that we can, even though we're separated, we are still united in the Lord and with a little help from technology.
Absolutely. Well, if we're not being able to travel for so long, where would we be?
Exactly. Yes.
So it's good to see you. Now,
Amen.
We've got a lot to talk about, but before we tell your story, let's start with telling the story of the House of Victory, or Beit Nitzachon, as it's called in Hebrew. When did this work start? Who started it and when?
Well, it was way back in the late 1980s when David Davis fell in love with Karen. And at the time they were living in New York. David was an actor on Broadway, a drama instructor at Fordham University in New York City. And David, of Gentile background, when he married his Jewish wife, Karen, they both had a passion and a desire to come to Israel. And while they were here as tourists, somebody spoke to them and said, David, you and Karen need to bring your faith to Israel because there is a tremendous drug problem here in the land. David had been sharing his testimony of how he had been working with David Wilkerson, the founder of Teen Challenge, who at the time was the pastor of Times Square Church in New York City. And David Davis, here he is as a university professor. He's hitting the streets of New York, reaching out to drug addicts. And when he told this story to a woman in Jerusalem, she spoke those words, and it was like a seed planted in the hearts of Karen and David, and it just began to take root. And suddenly they sensed the call of God to come to Israel to start a rehab program.
So what year would that have been?
Well, that was, meeting the woman was maybe like 1988, and somewhere in the late 1989, 1990, they came to Israel. David Wilkerson laid hands on him in Times Square Church and sent them off, and they moved to Israel. That was actually right around the time when the first Gulf War was taking place, when Saddam Hussein was sending missiles in from Baghdad. In fact, in the wee morning hours, the Davises would run from their apartment into one of the local bomb shelters. If there was ever a time for them to decide, hey, let's go back and do Jewish ministry in New York City, would have been a perfect opportunity. But praise the Lord, they were obedient to the vision that God had put on their hearts, and they stayed.
Now, the house that you are working from now, is that the original house that Beit Nitzachon? Is that where it all started?
Isn't it a beautiful thing? It was like, when God spoke to the children of Israel, and here I will put my name. When he spoke to David about the temple in Jerusalem. And, it's that same way. Beit Nitzachon started in this house, and we've been here for the last 30 years.
Now, am I right in remembering, Eric, that before that, the building was used historically by Christian groups?
Wow. Yes. I don't remember. I don't know all the details, but it was approximately, right after the First World War, when the British broke the 400-year stronghold of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and Palestine became under the mandate of the British. And at that point in 1918, many believers started coming into the land to share their faith in Yeshua. And one of them was a Jewish Messianic believer, came from London and actually started a Bible school, which then later became a hospital. And there is a famous doctor who lived and worked in this hospital. His name is Dr. James Churcher. And Dr. James Churcher, I should actually say, uh, is it Sir Dr. James Churcher? He was knighted by the Queen of
Wow.
England. So it got some great history.
And am I also right in remembering that Hannah Hurnard wrote her
Yes,
book there,
yes.
Hind's Feet on
Amen.
High Places?
Yeah, and she wrote many books. One of them was also her personal testimony. She was here. I remember because I read the book. I read the book in the United States in Northern California in, I would say, approximately 1983. And I said, Lord, send me to that place. Send me
Oh.
to Israel. And I couldn't believe it that when I finally came to the House of Victory, I discovered that this is where Hannah Hurnard lived and served. And from here, she wrote her testimony and the book about what the Lord was doing in Israel.
It's an amazing story. So that house has got a real Christian heritage, hasn't it? So here you are.
Amen.
You're
Yeah,
now director.
we're talking over 100 years,
Yeah.
100 years.
Yes.
When visiting groups used to come here before the Corona season, I would say to people before they came through our gates, I tell them to take their shoes off because this is holy
Holy
ground.
ground.
It's holy ground in the midst of the Holy Land.
So it's a big old stone house, and you have a balcony that overlooks the port of Haifa. And
Amen.
and
Amen.
here you are, Eric. You're the director here now. You've been there for a long time, haven't you?
Well, hey, when you are in the center of the Lord's will, and the joy of the Lord is your strength, and you want to also be obedient to the call and the place where God has chosen to put me. I'm very content in what I'm doing and blessed to be here.
So how many men do you have in your care at any one time?
Well, over the years, we've had as many as like 15, 16 guys at the house per time. Right now, we have 9 guys living in our midst. The Corona pandemic has certainly kind of hindered us in some ways, and yet we continue to press forward.
And am I right in thinking that you welcome Jewish and Arab men into your program?
Amen.
That's
Amen.
always been the that's
you
always
know,
been
what,
the
Yeah, that was the vision that David and Karen Davis received when David was reading in Ephesians chapter 2, the breaking down of that wall and the barrier that separates Jews and Gentiles, and in this case, here in Israel, Jews and Arabs. And we I would like to say, we're on the front line of this message of reconciliation between Jews and Arabs, and it's a beautiful thing when guys literally they come into the house not simply addicted to drugs and alcohol, but they come here addicted to their sin, which means they come here dead in their sin. And so when we see a man experiencing resurrection life and the Spirit of God begins to transform and change him, one of the things that needs to go is that hatred in his heart. That's what Ephesians talks about, a hatred that needs to be put to death by the power of the Spirit.
and you see
This
that
is the
happening.
process. This is the process of reconciliation.
And you see it. You see it happening.
We've seen it. We want to see more, but we've experienced it in our midst.
So when the men come into your program, they're very often still addicted to drugs or alcohol. So
That's true. Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to sit with them and wait for
Well,
them.
guys come in. ready, for those who are really serious. Some, do have motives. Some guys have tried to smuggle drugs into the property, or alcohol, cigarettes, contraband, but we have to frisk and search and make sure, they're not bringing any banned substances. But for the guys who are committed to making the effort to go into the new life, they go through a battle, but it's they pay the price, and we've seen men cross over to a new place.
Just explain simply, Eric, your daily program. It's quite disciplined, isn't it?
Well, we're not quite the military, but we try to be. How could I call it? When we come down at 6:00 in the morning to wake the men up, they weren't used to having certain sleeping patterns, going to bed at a certain time, waking up at a certain time. So, we come down, but we bless them with a nice cup of coffee, with tea with honey. And, we give them a half an hour to get their stuff together, and, clean up a little bit, get a cup of coffee, and then grab their Bibles, open up with a word of prayer, and then sit. We want to teach the men to be like Mary, who can sit at the feet of Yeshua and receive something from him in the morning reading of the word. I like to say in the breaking of the dawn, in the dawn of the day, that men can already begin to receive something from the scriptures. And after our time of reading, and we have a beautiful breakfast, and then we begin to clean up chores. We do some work around the house, and we have some free time left over before the morning Bible study. We'll have a cup of tea together. And then, one of the scheduled Bible teachers comes in, breaks forth the word, gives some homework assignment. And after a time, a little break in between, we go out once again and do a work detail. In the past, we were going up and working at our congregation. Today, the men were doing a lot of work of landscaping, preparing the ground for the springtime, where we're getting ready to begin to prepare the ground for the coming new season.
Eric, we're going to carry on with your story on next week's program. But for now, thank you for joining me today. We look forward to hearing more from you. Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab or Palestinian Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please visit our website, olivetreefund.org. Meanwhile, join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.